Art, as every human activity, is closely related to the experiences of its makers. Consequently, important facts in the life of the artist and the society where they live and work will exert some or less influence on their art. This may happen due to personal, sentimental, or economical circumstances in the artist's life, such as a moment of happiness because of marriage or birth of children, a moment of sadness because of the death of a beloved person, the move to another country or city, a change in their circle of friends or colleagues, economic or health problems, new knowledges, and etc., or also due to political and economic circumstances in the environment, such as a serious political and economic crisis, the beginning or end of a war and its effects, public health problems by famines or ailments, the arise of behaviors impulsed by big powers like the government or church, among others. All this makes the artists modify their way to create their artwork, because it affects on the access to materials, the budget for the artwork, the ideas for new projects, and more. Dance, conceived as the art of movement, is one of the oldest human activities. It was one of the first communication forms, and ancient populations had it amongst their religious rituals and social festivities to celebrate important facts. This way, they consolidate tribal links by believing in the same deities and practicing the same rituals. The only civilization to foresee dance and other performing arts artistic possibilities was the Greek one. But it was just until the 16th century when the idea that dance could be seen as an academic activity came up. During prehistory, the first foundation of art were placed. Humans, in use of their creativity, achieved to create languages and pieces that crystallized all that their imagination dictated. So pay attention, because this is Prehistory Part 2, Art. As we don't count with a testimony that tells us exactly what and how humans thought at that time, what we can do is guess it from the characteristics of their art they made. In the first artistic samples of prehistory, stones were also the stars, installing monoliths or menhirs, simple structures with one single stone standing upright like the one in Évora in Portugal by the 1500 before Christ, or the Egtved girl in Denmark by the 1400 before Christ. We could guess that they served to mark a place that had already been occupied. In case the people misled and arrived at the same place again, they would know that they had already been there, or to warn other people that might arrive after them that that place had been occupied. They also raised dolmens or megaliths like the Gangtija in Malta by the 3600 before Christ, or Stonehenge by the 2700 before Christ. These may have served as praying places or tombs. Maybe human beings built them in the places where they stayed so that they could gather their dead to make some kind of ceremony for them, asking for protection from their gods and goddesses during their stay on this place, or to protect them while they continued their travel, given its shape similar to a door. Megaliths were bigger and more planned structures, so they must have served as sacred places, where they practiced some rituals. Maybe humans didn't live around these places, but they came back to it every certain period of time to celebrate a particular religious event. In sculpture we outline the statuettes with stones, bones, wood and clay, or the reliefs or engravements in stones like the Venus of Willendorf by the 30,000 before Christ, or the Wolverine pendant in Les Aziz caves in France 12,000 years ago. Stone statuettes could have been representations of how these persons imagined their gods to be, but they could have also been toys for the children. From the moment where humans discovered how to work the metals, they gave free rein to their creativity and began to create more thorough and detailed pieces, like cauldrons and glasses. Also this originated jewelry, with which they adorned people and bodies. Eventually the metals would be used to make statuettes or deities representations. Sometimes they used mixed techniques, combining pottery with arts of fire or sculpting with arts of fire. At the beginning, people of this time stayed in places where the nature itself provided them shelter and food, stayed there for a few days or weeks, and then moved to another place. Near the equator, or where climate was warmer and more stable, they stayed in not-so-deep caverns or wooden zones. but in places with a more extreme and less hospitable climate, they found themselves in the need of looking for shelter in deep caverns. In these temporary living places, walls were the rock-art blossomed, made on the walls of these caverns, of course rocky, like the paintings in Altamira Cave, Spain, near the 12,000 before Christ, the ones in Lascaux Cave, France, by the 14,000 before Christ, and engravements and petroglyphs, like the ones in Tanum, Sweden, by the 1600 before Christ, and the ones in Val Camonica, Italy, 10,000 years ago. It is possible to think that humans created it to decorate the places where they stayed a little, just like we paint the walls or hang paintings on them to decorate our houses. However, as tribes at that time were still nomadic, it is difficult to imagine that they felt these places like their homes, because in fact they weren't going to stay much time there. It is more probable that they created them as an entertainment when the weather was too harsh for them to move and they had to stay some more time in the same cave. We can think that painting served to keep a register of daily activities, like a list of tasks, or maybe a way to teach the children about the tribe's customs. They would also apply the ink on their own bodies, giving birth to makeup. When human beings became sedentary, they had to build the places they were going to inhabit, so the cities or citadels came up, like Sesklo in Greece near the 6850 before Christ, Los Millares in Spain by the 2000 before Christ, and Villanova de São Pedro in Portugal around the 2700 before Christ. As dance is a living art that only exists when it's executed, it was very hard at that time to leave a backup that proved its existence. It wasn't but until the invention of rock paintings that human beings could capture graphically people dancing. This suggests that for that moment people already had dances that were practiced in specific moments with pre-established steps and with clear structure, and of course the music that accompanied them would have been developed as well. A first form of acting would be born from body expression, with which people imitated the behavior of animals and other persons, but later it would serve to represent the myths and legends in which each population believed. With the development of languages, words might be included in the myths, giving birth to dramaturgy. Music and singing, being conditioned by religion or social events, as well as dance, might have developed to delimit the duration of a particular ritual, and if it was done in several phases, changes in the rhythm, composition, or instrumentation might announce the end of one phase and the beginning of another one. These may have included the moments when people were supposed to dance and when they weren't. These dances were almost always made in a circle or half a circle around an adoration object or a shaman. As governors gathered more power and influence, they also wanted people's attention, and with that, social dances arose, where people generally celebrated facts regarding the lives and works of people in the government or people from privileged social status, and generally the dances were oriented towards them. Each population left their own backup of their dance practices in paintings, reliefs, engravements, vases, or murals. Among the great civilizations that arose in the antiquity, ancient Egypt is the most known and appreciated today. Egyptians in the artistic field were renowned by their architecture and great-scale sculpture. The most famous are the big effigy of Giza by the 2600 before Christ and the pyramids, being the ones in Giza the most famous, built by the 2570 before Christ, constituting the only of the 7 ancient world wonders that still exists. But they also made paintings and bas-reliefs, like the mural painting in Princess Itet's tomb by the 2700 before Christ and the erotic papyrus of Turin by the 1500 before Christ. Sculptures and busts, like the seated scribe by the 2350 before Christ and Amenemhat III statue by the 1802 before Christ. They used a lot the metals, and they had a special interest on representing the human body, doing it each part separately, captured for the angle from where they were appreciated better. They also had what we could call the first advertisements, announcing shops, products and places. All these civilizations had their art forms, In America there was a lot of pottery and jewels production, totems made of wood, especially in the north, and many rock paintings like the ones in Pedro Furado in Brazil around 32,000 years ago, and the ones in the Cueva de las Manos in Argentina by the 7035 before Christ. There was also a lot of pottery, working stones and petroglyphs. In Asia there were many statuettes like the Venus of Berejat-Ram among Lebanon, Israel, Jordan and Syria around 250,000 years ago. In Oceania and the Pacific there were rock paintings like the ones in Bradshaw in Australia, sculptures and carvings like the carved shells and the mimics in Australia, or the money stones in the Micronesia, architecture like the reunion houses in Melanesia, and wooden instruments like the didgeridoo in Australia, and much body art. Phoenicians specialized in ceramics, Mesopotamians in engravings, and Babylonians in big buildings. Human beings had to face environmental and natural conditions in a complete disadvantage in order to be able to maintain the species, and almost all their actions were oriented to guarantee that. We could think that the arts didn't help with human survival, and, from this perspective, it might seem something useless. However, art's function was to represent in a visible way what went through the people's minds and imagination, like their ideas, interests and emotions, so that they could get through to other individuals, which would help building links among the people with common ideas, interests and emotions. So then, art at the beginning served for individual expression and communication. Many people linked by the same ideas, interests and emotions would form societies. From that moment on, art would become the fingerprint of each society. Art would serve to create pieces that would allow the identification of each society's interests and values. It's because of these that from the moment when humans discovered art, they have never let it disappear throughout all the history of humanity. Finally, we have to say that there's very little information on how dance was in prehistory. And those times there weren't any ways of registering dances as we have video cameras now. It was finally by the rock paintings, pottery and reliefs that people could leave evidence that dance existed and was regularly practiced. Still, it is impossible to know exactly how dance was at the time. The closest we can get is conditioned by what's revealed on the archaeological and historical evidences, plus the dances and cultures of populations that have remained with very little external influences until the present and still maintain certain customs for hundreds or maybe thousands of years ago. This combined with a big wide imagination in order to fill the information vacuum. After the development of writing, there are big changes in art. Now having languages well developed to be able to communicate most ideas, plus the evolution of societies, plus writing, artists search for studying better their art so that it became more sophisticated and meticulous. This causes the existence of many written studies about different types of art. From this moment on, two civilizations stand out and they would leave big contributions to art history, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. I hope you have liked this video, and I also hope it has served you to understand a little better about where art came from and how was art in the prehistory. If it was like that, I invite you to like the video, comment in the box below, subscribe to the channel or share this video with your friends, and you and I will see each other in another video.